Great. I think that was a great segue to our last discussant, that's Jim Oehmke. And he's a senior food security and nutrition advisor with the USAID Bureau for Food Security. I think he'll talk to us about accountability, and I'll see if I see his slides here while he walks up to the stage. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for the invitation to talk here. It is indeed a pleasure to talk. It is indeed a pleasure to talk at IFPRI, but particularly on the donor's favorite question: can we have it all? Seriously, this is a really important question for a couple reasons. I want to focus on the socio-political aspects of it. I'm going to focus on that from an economist's viewpoint. This is, in fact, the first order problem of resource allocation. So we have a number of societal issues that we want to address, and we want to allocate resources in order best to address those issues on multiple fronts at the same time. So none of the traditional economic tools work very well. Adam Smith's invisible hand, incentive compatibility, contingent contracts, none of that works very well within this context. So we have to then come up with a new process for making these resource allocations. Just to give you, and you've had a little bit of flavor from the previous presenters about how complex this is. So they did a lot of my job for me, but let me just reinforce how complex these issues are. So what do you think is the critical issue? Let me see if I could. How many people think that with weather change, one of the pressing issues going forward is going to be feeding a burgeoning world population, just providing enough food? Okay, I see some hands going up. Some of you who have your hands raised may feel that therefore your key change is to invest resources that maximize the production of foods, particularly staple foods. How many people believe that the key step that needs to be taken is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including agricultural greenhouse gas emissions? Okay, a fewer number, but some. And as Jess said, it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, it's a variety of environmental and ecological issues there. If you believe that you should indeed have agriculture reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, you're probably not in favor of intensive, high productivity, high production agriculture. You're probably not in favor of some greenhouse gas heavy staple crops, such as fertilized maize or rice. So there's an issue there. How many believe that the greatest threat to mankind's current lifestyle is what we are in the midst of, the sixth great extinction? I'm not talking about the extinction of man here. I'm talking about the extinction of species that we directly or indirectly depend on. Okay, so I have some hands up here again. Now, if this is your take, then you don't want large-scale farming at all. You want ecological corridors, you want preservation of environmental areas, you want some pristine areas that go untouched. That's the best way to preserve the habitat. That is the best way to preserve the species. And how many people believe that perhaps the extreme weather events that will impact mankind the most will happen to the coastal populations that make up 80% of the world's people? Okay, so now what are you going to do? Are you going to move those coastal populations into the areas that you want to have for pristine ecological preserves or for increased agricultural production? So we're just talking about a little narrow area of agriculture and food here, and we've already got all these issues and conflicts. Wait till we expand it to all of the SDGs and the other global processes that we want to achieve. It's a tough issue, but fortunately, and what you've seen from some of the other presentations, are that there are ways of addressing this. What I want to do is step back a little bit and think about what's the process in which we implement these ways. So I'm going to talk about mutual accountability, and I'm particularly going to talk about mutual accountability as it is maturing within the African agricultural and food sector. So at the continental level, at the regional level, at the national level. So the first thing here on mutual accountability is that we need an agreed upon plan, and by agreed upon, I mean agreed upon by all stakeholders. So this is the concept that as a donor, we recognize our limitations in dealing with some of these issues. Donors and governments together cannot solve these problems. It indeed takes a global village. It takes a global village at the local level, at the national level, at the continental level, and at the global level. So if you're going to have a plan, you have to have all the members of your global village engaged in that plan in order to help move it forward. We got lots of plans, okay? We're really good at planning. Problem comes with implementation, okay? So how do you implement this kind of plan? Well, the first thing you need are voluntary and publicly announced stakeholder commitments to take actions that are aligned with and further that plan. So as I said, it takes a global village. Get everyone in the global village to commit to moving that plan forward. What can you do as an individual, as an organization, to move that plan forward? Now, again, commitments are a step forward from planning, but they're not everything. So we need accountability. And we brought this up, I think Jess brought this up and Faustine brought this up. How, in fact, do you do accountability? You have to hold yourself, or I have to hold myself, and we all have to hold each other accountable for the individual commitments that we made in public in order to move this plan forward. My agreement not to eat as many greenhouse gas consuming foods as I would otherwise is good only if someone else commits to producing foods with low greenhouse gas emissions. How do you put that all together, and how do we hold ourselves accountable for that? And then finally, we need joint accountability for the portfolio of commitments. We need to make sure that the plan is in fact moving us forward on these multiple fronts. We may not be able to have it all, but we may be able to have more on multiple fronts than what we're having now. How do we in fact embrace those multiple criteria and move them forward? So then Claudia asked me also to address the question of where do we invest. And you've seen some very good suggestions for where we invest in the speakers today, and I applaud them for those suggestions and also for making those suggestions as concise and as timely, but with as much detail as you guys were able to do. So that was great. I support all those investments. What I want to do is ask the question in sort of a broad perspective and give three answers. One is process-wise, no surprise, I believe we should invest in mutual accountability processes. Second is geographically. And here I would argue that we need to really think about investing in secondary cities, in smaller cities, in rural small towns. For a number of reasons, I will mention just one. Just pointed out the co-location within the food system. There is a critical role for secondary cities to play in that co-location for both economic efficiency reasons and for societal reasons. Let me give one societal reason. We are moving smallholders from subsistence farming into an integrated, more commercial agricultural sector. As smallholders become more commercialized, they depend on markets for their food. Where are the markets in rural areas? They're in the small towns. You have to have a food system that is effective in the small towns in order to feed that population, which is projected to be the most food insecure and the poorest in the world going forward. And thematically, I would argue that we need to focus on the policy environment. So this is different from the Green Revolution, which in the Indian Punjab and the rice-growing areas in Southeast Asia was driven by semi-dwarf wheat varieties and rice varieties, technological innovations. Here, I think in order to address this broad societal question, we need policy processes that are going to be the catalyst for moving it forward. Then we can do the resource allocation to invest in the dissemination of existing technologies, in research for new technologies, and in other important resource areas. But I think it's the policy environment that allows us to do the mutual accountability, to hold everyone in this room and outside accountable for our own contributions to solving these problems. Thank you.